I want to give a huge shout out and a thank you to my sponsor, P2 Collectibles, located at 204 East McGalley Road in Muncie and on eBay as well. So next time you're here in Muncie, let us know. Come give us a visit.
Hey, what is up, y'all? This is Alex from Plus3 TCG, and I'm going to be coming at y'all with a little bit of a discussion today. Sorry if I sound a little off. I'm kind of sick. Daughter had the flu, and I think she passed it off to me. Bastard. Anyways, today I want to talk about formats and the various types of formats, especially because we're in kind of an anomaly right now. We're in what I would call Yu-Gi-Oh soup, where a bit of everything has a little bit of viability. And I want to talk about maybe not so much which is better, but I just want to talk about the various factors of what goes into the different types of formats. I'm going to be talking about the 3 to 4 deck formats. We all remember the BA Shadal Klee format. That was a good one. I want to talk about the tier 0 formats as well, where things like Zoo were super dominant, Spiral, things like that. And then, of course, the Yu-Gi-Oh soup, as I like to call it, where a bit of everything is viable. And I'm going to start off with the discussion of the 3 to 4 deck formats. We're going to be talking about the pros and the cons and see what y'all think. Let me know down in the comments section below. So the first thing that I think that the 3 to 4 deck formats allows is it's much more manageable to side deck in this type of format because of the amount of factors that go into side decking for only 3 to 4 decks. You don't have to commit a little space like you do right now for so many decks, because when they're above 4 and 5 decks that have viability, you only have 15 cards in the side deck, so you already have to plan out like only 2 cards per matchup. If there are 5 to even 6 viable decks, it's just very hard to plan for that. So you can only get like 2 to 3 cards in for your matchup, and only like 1 to 2 cards in for a rogue matchup. So it's a lot harder to side in something like that, and it's a lot easier to side in something like a 3 to 4 deck format. And the strategies are usually kind of supplemental, and what I mean by that is like one deck is good at something, the other deck might be bad at it, or they might be able to capitalize off it better, like the BA Shadal Klee format. You might hear me talk about that a little bit more, because that is kind of the epitome of a triangle format, because that was probably the last time a lot of people had skillful fun in a format. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the BA Shadal Klee format really allowed people to capitalize off of the weaknesses of the other deck. If the other deck could, the BAs being able to take out Klee, if I'm remembering correctly, Shadal being able to take out BA, Shadal not having the best matchup against Klee, just things like that. They can still be quite skillful as well, considering the amount of factors that go into acquainting oneself with the decks of the format, the card pool and lines of play, things like that. There's not as many factors that you have to go into, and it keeps things much more manageable, unlike the Yu-Gi-Oh soup format, where the factors in the format are much less manageable. The cons of the 3 to 4 deck formats are that there's still dominant decks that prevent a lot of diversity outside of the pre-established best decks. So if you're not like the most competitive player and you're playing like Raccoons or something, this is probably not going to be the format for you, because your deck, if it's not already in the established 3 to 4 decks that in that time are arguably the strongest, it's probably not going to do the best. And another thing to consider is that there's still factors to remember outside of technical play, and a lot of people like to think that technical play is what makes a format good. If technical play is what's shining in the format, then that is, for the most part, I guess, a good format. But there's still factors outside of technical play in a 3 to 4 deck format, like the other opponent's card choices and lines of play. It just makes it semi-difficult to play in a format like this if you're not the most competitive player, if you're not trying to remember a lot of different lines of play. You just want to kind of let your deck do its own thing and hope your opponent doesn't know what it does. Skillful play is still rewarded, but if you play the deck that you have a bad matchup against, the win may be harder to get, and it's not necessarily because of lack of skill and technical play and resource management. Your deck just may not have the best matchup against it, and there's not much you can do about that. So there's some things to consider with the 3 to 4 deck formats. Moving on to the tier 0 format, arguably one of the most skillful to be a part of. I know a lot of people will probably argue that tier 0 formats are cancerous and they are just for the meta sheep that want to play the best deck. Sure, that's fine. Keep telling yourself that. But Necroz was Necroz, and it was good. Everyone played Necroz because it was good, not because you can call it like meta sheep if you would like, but if everyone is in a race car and everyone is driving a Ferrari F-150 and you decide to pull up in your Volkswagen GTI and say like, I still have a chance in this, well, it's likely you're not going to, just because right at that time the Ferrari F-150 is the best car. Not saying it is right now, but in that instance, that's the best car. Why wouldn't you be driving it? Same reason to play Necroz or to play Spire or to play Zoo. That's the best deck of that format, so of course why are you not going to play it? And that is where the most skillful player will usually shine, because if everyone is playing the same thing, the only factor that you really have to manage is technical play. You don't have to really remember a big card pull. Your side deck is pretty much for the mirror match and maybe rogue matchups here and there, but your deck engine is usually so strong that the skill will speak for itself. And if you are a skillful player, you should be able to shine very well in the tier 0 format, and that is the allure of the tier 0 format, is that the most skillful player will usually come out on top. And with only, like I was saying, with only one deck to manage, the technical play and deck building are the only factors to focus on, thus making it a highly skillful format. And that's one of the biggest pros to the tier 0 format, because there are if you're not a super competitive player, here comes the cons. This format sucks. You do not want to play this format because there's only one deck. If you're not trying to compete at the top level, why play in a tier 0 format if you're not ready to play the deck that everyone else is playing? Because if you're not playing that deck, there's little chance of you doing well at a regionals. I mean, all right, locals and stuff, that doesn't count. You can still like pull one out of your ass because they have zero indication of the meta, because they're extremely small turnouts. So just keep that in mind. So if you're winning locals with your raccoons, it's probably because everyone else there just sucks, or you just got lucky and didn't face a matchup that was any kind of relevant. Not to like shit on anyone's locals or anything, it's just that is an objective fact. You can't really use locals as like any kind of indication of the meta. Anyways, off the soapbox. Like I said, if you're not playing that deck, you're the best deck in a tier 0 format, you're probably not going to win, and that is why a lot of people don't like tier 0 formats, because some people really want diverse. They want to play tons of different decks all the time, see a bunch of creativity going on, and I like that too. I think creativity is great. It's just, it gets a little more difficult to argue for skillful play when everyone is playing something different. And that's kind of what leads me into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup. I know I didn't really talk too much about tier 0 formats because there's not a lot of pros and cons to it outside of, if you're not a competitive player, this format sucks because the decks are expensive, because the engines alone are really expensive. Like Necroz, that was a really expensive deck. So if you wanted to play Necroz, you had to lay down a lot of money. I remember people talking about like $1,000 Necroz decks. That's ridiculous. That's so ridiculous. That turns anyone off of playing. But those are the most skillful formats, and that is the allure of them. Expensive decks is going to draw in the best players because they're willing to spend the money to play at the highest level. That's why a lot of people kind of turn away from the game during these tier 0 formats. I know a lot of people said they were going to quit during Spiral format or Zoo format. I'm sure people did that in like Teledad format and like Heradic rulers or just plain D rulers. You get where I'm going with this. These tier 0 formats aren't the non-competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Player's best friend. But maybe the Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup format isn't really for you either. There's some pros to this. Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup format, and the biggest one is diversity. Diversity is the most alluring part of this type of format. With so many decks, you don't really have to rely on skillful technical play as much, because the chance of your opponent knowing how to play against Aqua Actress Phantom Knights or Crystal Beast, not saying like either of those are bad. I don't even think Aqua Actress Phantom Knights is real. I just made that up. But Crystal Beast, now they got their new support, who knows? They might be alright. But the cool thing about playing those decks is that no one's going to know how to play them, giving you quite the upper hand. And with this type of format, you're also rewarded as a player for knowing your deck really well. You don't have to so much know everyone else's deck, but it does. Oh man, if you can be in this type of format and shine, I'm talking like go to multiple regionals, go to a YCS, and get a top or win with like 6 or 7 different really strong decks in the format. If you can shine in this, it's probably because you know how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Really well, and you know like all the information on all the decks, making you like a Magnus Carlsen of Yu-Gi-Oh! But that's not happening as much, and I guess if you did want to argue that you can almost argue that this could potentially be the most skillful format if you can memorize every single one of the factors. But like I said, I'm not a Magnus Carlsen. I don't have the memory capacity like that, and I don't know if a lot of people have the memory capacity like that, and it's hard to honestly make that argument that this would be the most skillful because of the amount of factors that go into it. Another cool part is just like the creativity. Playing against a bunch of various decks at any point can be pretty fun and interesting. Like I said, if I ran into an Aqua Actress Phantom Knight deck that actually worked, that would be really cool to just watch how it interacted with me. I don't really see that often, and that is one of the cool things about Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup formats. If you can, like I said, if you can succeed in a format like this, you're probably really intelligent. Just because of the factors, all of the play testing, the game and ruling knowledge, is just the memory that goes into succeeding consistently in a Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup format is pretty nuts. But there are also a lot of cons to this. Maybe this is being a bit biased, but I'd like to think I'm trying to look at all the objective points. And objectively, it's the most difficult out of all the choices to manage a main or side deck, just because there's so many factors. There's so many decks and variables to think about that it's near impossible to base a decision on a skillful meta call. In this type of format, you pretty much have to know more about the other decks than in any of the other formats, because most of the gameplay will be based around knowing what the other decks do. When there's 5, 6, 7 plus decks that are all viably able to win, I mean, if you don't know all these decks, you're at quite the disadvantage. No matter how good at Yu-Gi-Oh! You are, how good your technical play, how good of resource management you can pull out. If you come into a duel not knowing what the other deck does, your chances of winning have went down immensely. With such a high potential of being at a disadvantage due to not knowing what a deck does versus not being good at resource management and interaction with your cards, this type of format seems less than ideal, if we're being maybe subjective there, I guess. I just don't necessarily think, as far as like competition goes, you would want to have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup format. It's fun, but not very competitive because of the lack of skill in your interactions. It's pretty much just, do you know what my deck does? No? Well, I'm at a really high advantage because I do know what ABCs do, so you're in trouble. And I don't think there can be much skill to that. I think that's one of the biggest cons of Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup, is that it's the least skillful because of the amount of factors. No one's going into Yu-Gi-Oh! To be like, hey, I want to learn all the decks so that I can come in just being able to know what everything does and be prepared for everything. That's just not a good use of energy. You focus on what decks are good at the time and work from there. And in one deck formats, that's the easiest, which allows you to just focus on technical play. The 3 to 4 deck formats are kind of a nice little even balance, because you can still manage your technical play very well and your technical play can shine, but you also have to manage a lot more resources, which adds a little bit of management, or resource management, a skill that you wouldn't utilize as much in a one deck tier 0 format. but all of those still require a hefty bit of competitiveness. And if you're not super competitive, Yu-Gi-Oh! Soup format is probably going to be your best friend, because diversity, creativity is really rewarded there. Not so much technical play because of the amount of resources, but technical play isn't important to everybody. Where, I mean, arguably it should be, because that's kind of what puts you in front of the other person. If you're both playing Aqua Actress Phantom Knights, the best Aqua Actress Phantom Knight deck builder is going to win, or technical player is going to win. And that is what makes these formats less competitive. Still really fun because you get to see a bunch of cool stuff, but a little less competitive. I don't know, y'all. I'm just trying to talk out loud here, talk about what I think is the allure of some of these different formats. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments section below. Let me know if you think I was wrong or way off based on a lot of my comments or some of them. Let me know down in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And this is Alex from +3 TCG signing out, y'all.